I watched my 6-year-old daughter lift her little clay sculpture with both hands. She'd practiced this moment for weeks. "Happy birthday, Grandma," Lily whispered, carefully sounding out every word as she held the lopsided sculpture toward my mother. The room fell quiet. My mother's smile lasted barely a second. She turned the sculpture over once, wrinkled her nose and laughed. "What am I supposed to do with this junk?" Someone near the dining table chuckled. Another relative shrugged. "Oh, Diane, just put it in the donation box with the other things." Before I could even react, my mother walked across the room and dropped the sculpture into a large cardboard box filled with clothes and household items destined for charity. "Thank you." That tiny sound echoed through the room far louder than the laughter. I looked at Lily. She didn't cry. She didn't protest. She simply stared at the donation box as though something inside her had gone completely still. Then she slowly opened her empty hands. My mother smiled at another guest as if nothing had happened. "Honestly," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "children don't need to be told everything they make is special." Nobody defended Lily. Nobody told my mother she'd gone too far. And I said nothing. I reached for my daughter's hand instead. Because in that moment, I realized arguing with my mother would only give everyone another spectacle to watch. But before the night was over, I quietly took one thing back. 9 years later, that same worthless sculpture sold for $4,600,000. And suddenly, my mother insisted it had always belonged to her. My name is Charlotte Bennett, and for most of my life I believed peace was something you protected by staying quiet. It was a lesson my mother had taught me long before I understood what it cost. If she criticized my clothes, I apologized. If she embarrassed me in front of relatives, I smiled. If she decided I was being too sensitive, I convinced myself she was probably right. By the time I became a museum collections conservator, I could identify priceless historical artifacts in seconds. I just couldn't recognize how much damage one person could quietly do to the people closest to her. My daughter Lily changed that. Lily was 6 that summer. She was autistic. Words didn't come easily to her, but feelings did. She expressed them through clay. Week after week, during occupational therapy, she'd patiently shape tiny figures, smoothing every fingerprint with complete concentration. When her therapist asked who she wanted to make something for, Lily had answered with only one word: "Grandma." For nearly 3 months, she'd worked on that sculpture. Every crooked line and uneven edge represented an hour she refused to give up. She carried it everywhere before my mother's birthday, terrified it might break before she could give it away. She truly believed Grandma would love it. Instead, my mother called it junk. When the party finally ended and guests drifted toward the driveway, I waited until everyone was distracted loading leftovers into their cars. Then I walked back inside. The donation box still sat beside the hallway closet. I reached inside. Old sweaters, a lamp, several books. Then my fingers touched cool clay. I carefully lifted out Lily's sculpture. Nothing had broken. I wrapped it inside one of my scarves and carried it to the car without saying a word to anyone. Lily watched me buckle it gently into the back seat beside her. She looked at me for several seconds before asking the only question she'd spoken since the party. "We'd keep her." "Yes," I whispered. "We keep her." When we got home, I placed the sculpture inside a protective storage cabinet in my office. Not because I imagined it would ever be worth anything. Not because I thought anyone else would ever care. I kept it because one little girl deserved to know that the first gift she ever poured her heart into would never end up forgotten in a stranger's donation pile. For 9 years, it stayed exactly where I had placed it. Until one ordinary Tuesday morning, my phone rang. The woman on the other end asked one question that changed everything. Is this the owner of the earliest documented sculpture created by Lily Bennett? I nearly dropped my phone. The earliest what? I asked. The earliest documented sculpture created by Lily Bennett, the woman repeated. My name is Rebecca Sloan. I'm the lead curator for the Modern Expressions Museum. We've been organizing Lily's first retrospective, and several art historians believe one childhood sculpture may still exist. I slowly looked toward the storage cabinet in my office. For 9 years I'd barely opened it. I think I know the piece you're talking about. There was a pause. You do. I've had it all this time. Rebecca's voice softened. Mrs. Bennett, would you be willing to let us examine it? 2 days later, I carried the sculpture into the museum wrapped in the same faded blue scarf I'd used the night of my mother's birthday. Lily, now 15, walked beside me. She was taller than I was now, with calm eyes that noticed details everyone else missed. Crowded places still overwhelmed her, but the museum was different. She always seemed comfortable surrounded by art. Rebecca carefully removed the scarf. Nobody spoke. 3 conservators leaned closer. One adjusted her glasses. Another quietly called someone else into the room. Lily shifted beside me. Is bad, she whispered. Rebecca looked up immediately. No. She smiled. It's extraordinary. I frowned. It was made by a 6-year-old. Exactly. She pointed toward one tiny section near the base. See these repeating carved patterns? Lily nodded. You still use this exact visual rhythm in your newest sculptures. Another curator carefully compared photographs from Lily's recent exhibition. They're almost identical, he said quietly. The language was already there. I stared at the sculpture I'd rescued from a donation box. All these years I'd only seen a little girl's gift. They were seeing the beginning of an artist. Rebecca gently turned toward me. Do you know how rare this is? I shook my head. When historians study great artists, they almost never find the first surviving work that clearly predicts everything that comes later. She looked back at Lily. This is where her artistic voice began. Lily blinked several times before asking, Really? Rebecca smiled. Really? Over the following weeks, the museum prepared Lily's retrospective. Critics from around the country praised her sculptures. Some admired their technical precision. Others wrote about the emotional honesty in every piece. Many described how Lily transformed the way they understood autism, not as something limiting creativity, but as something that shaped a completely original artistic perspective. I read every article, not because of the praise, because every success reminded me of 6-year-old Lily standing silently beside that donation box. My mother never attended a single exhibition. She skipped birthdays. She never visited Lily's therapy sessions. Whenever I mentioned another award or scholarship, she'd wave a dismissive hand. She's talented enough for local shows, she'd say. But don't spend your savings chasing impossible dreams. I eventually stopped bringing it up. Lily noticed. She never asked why Grandma wasn't there. She simply stopped expecting her. Then Rebecca invited us back to the museum. We'd like to include the childhood sculpture as the centerpiece of a charity auction. Auction, I asked. The proceeds would establish scholarships for neurodivergent children pursuing art. Lily's earliest sculpture has become historically significant now that her career has taken off. I looked at Lily. What do you think? She didn't answer immediately. She always took time before making important decisions. Finally, she smiled. Help kids. Rebecca nodded. That's exactly what we hoped you'd say. Preparations began immediately. Professional photographs were taken. The sculpture appeared in the auction catalogue, alongside an explanation of its historical importance. For the first time in 9 years, the little clay figure was no longer hidden inside my cabinet. The world was about to see what my daughter had created before she was old enough to understand how remarkable she truly was. Then, 3 days before the catalogue was officially released, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar voicemail. I pressed play. My mother's voice filled the room. "I heard you found my birthday sculpture. Charlotte, we need to talk." I listened to the voicemail twice. Not because I hadn't heard the words. Because my mother had called it my birthday sculpture. Not Lily's sculpture. Not her granddaughter's gift. Hers. I deleted the message without responding. The next afternoon, my doorbell rang. When I opened it, my mother stood there wearing one of her perfectly tailored cream jackets, holding a bakery box as if we were about to have a pleasant family visit. "I brought Lily her favorite cinnamon rolls," she said brightly. Lily looked up from the dining table. "Grandma." It wasn't excitement. It was recognition. My mother smiled wider than I'd seen in years. "My beautiful granddaughter." She bent to hug Lily, who politely accepted it but quickly stepped back. Then my mother's eyes drifted toward the sculpture, sitting on the dining room sideboard, where Rebecca's team had temporarily placed it inside a protective display case before transporting it to the museum. "There it is," she whispered. She walked straight toward it. "I've missed seeing this." I folded my arms. "Really?" She ignored the question. "You know, Charlotte, I've been thinking." "About what?" "It was my birthday present." I felt my stomach tighten. So the auction money should come to me." The room became painfully quiet. I stared at her, waiting for the joke that never came. "You threw it away." "I absolutely did not." "You dropped it into a donation box." "I set it there temporarily." "You called it junk." I was overwhelmed. People misremember things. I took a slow breath. "Lily remembers." My mother looked toward her granddaughter. "Oh, sweetheart, Grandma didn't mean it like that." Lily didn't answer. Instead, she quietly picked up her sketchbook and walked into the next room. The silence she left behind was louder than an argument. My mother sighed dramatically. "You always turn her against me." I laughed once. "It wasn't amused." "She watched you throw away the first gift she ever made for you." "I did not throw it away." "You expected strangers to carry it away for you." Her face hardened. "Charlotte, legally speaking, it was a birthday gift." "It stopped being your gift when you abandoned it." She shook her head. "We let professionals decide that." Then she left. I hoped that would be the end of it. It wasn't. Within 48 hours, my phone exploded with messages from relatives. "Your mother says you're stealing from her. She told us the sculpture belonged to her collection. Why can't you split the money? She's your mother, Charlotte." One cousin posted online that families shouldn't fight over inheritances before anyone had even died. Another suggested I'd manipulated Lily's success for financial gain. People who hadn't visited us in years suddenly had very strong opinions. I refused to respond publicly. Instead, I gathered every photograph I could find from my mother's birthday party 9 years earlier. There weren't many. But one image made me stop. It showed my mother laughing with guests. Just behind her sat the donation box. The sculpture was sticking out of the top. Clear as day. I enlarged the image. Another photo, taken minutes later, showed the sculpture even farther inside the box, after more donations had been piled on top. Rebecca studied the pictures. "These are time-stamped." "Yes. They establish exactly what happened." My mother wasn't finished. She called several relatives together for what she described as a family meeting. I agreed to attend. Not because I expected understanding. Because I was tired of people hearing only one version of the story. The moment I walked into my aunt's living room, everyone fell silent. My mother spoke first. "Charlotte, before this goes any further, I'd like you to admit you removed my birthday gift without permission." I placed the printed photographs on the coffee table. No speeches, no accusations. Just photographs. One by one, relatives leaned forward. "I remember that donation box," my uncle murmured. "So do I," another aunt said quietly. Someone pointed. "Wait, that's the sculpture." Another cousin frowned. "Diane, why was it in there?" My mother's smile faltered for the first time. I was just setting it aside." I looked directly at her. "You called it junk." "I don't remember saying that." "I do," one cousin admitted softly. "So do I," another added. The room shifted. Not completely, but enough. For the first time, people weren't automatically accepting my mother's version. She stood abruptly. "This changes nothing." The following morning, an attorney's letter arrived at my house. It demanded that the museum halt the sale immediately, claiming disputed ownership of the sculpture. Rebecca called me an hour later. "I wanted you to hear this from us." My heart pounded. "Is the auction cancelled?" She didn't hesitate. "No." There was a brief pause before she added, "The auction house has reviewed every document." Then she spoke the words my mother never expected to hear. "The sale will proceed exactly as scheduled." The morning of the auction, I stood outside the gallery with Lily beside me. Television vans lined the curb. Photographers adjusted their cameras. Museum guests, collectors, and reporters gathered beneath banners announcing Voices in Clay, the Lily Bennett collection. Lily slipped her hand into mine. "So many." "I know," I said gently. "If it gets overwhelming, we'll step outside." She nodded once. "I'm okay." Rebecca met us at the entrance. "You both ready?" "As ready as we'll ever be." She smiled reassuringly. The response has been extraordinary. As we entered the gallery, conversations quietly stopped. People weren't staring because of the lawsuit. They were staring because Lily had become one of the youngest sculptors ever invited to headline a major charitable auction. Collectors examined each sculpture carefully. Several students stood in front of the childhood piece, longer than any of the newer works. One elderly woman whispered to her husband, "You can almost see her future beginning." Lily heard it. A shy smile crossed her face. Then the doors opened again. My mother walked in. She wore an elegant navy dress and enough confidence to suggest she believed she was the guest of honor. Behind her came two relatives and the attorney who had threatened the museum. Several reporters immediately approached. "Mrs. Bennett," one called, "is it true you're disputing ownership of tonight's centerpiece?" My mother straightened her shoulders. "That sculpture has been part of my family's private collection for years." I stared at her. Private collection. It had spent 9 years inside my office cabinet because she'd thrown it away. Another reporter asked, "So why sell it now?" She smiled for the cameras. "I've always believed art should inspire people. I'm pleased the public will finally appreciate something our family preserved." Rebecca quietly touched my arm. "Don't." I wasn't planning to. The facts speak for themselves. I looked toward Lily. She hadn't even turned around. She was studying another artist's work across the room. That was my answer. We weren't here to fight. We were here because of art. A few minutes later, everyone took their seats. The auctioneer welcomed the audience and explained that every dollar raised would fund scholarships for neurodivergent young artists. Lily squeezed my hand. "Kids like me. Exactly like you." The bidding began with several contemporary pieces. Each sold well. Then attendants carefully carried Lily's childhood sculpture onto the stage. The room became almost silent. The auctioneer smiled. "Our next offering is believed to be the earliest surviving sculpture created by internationally acclaimed artist Lily Bennett." He paused. This work marks the beginning of a remarkable artistic journey. Bidding opened. $250,000. A paddle immediately rose. $300,000. Another followed. $450,000. Hands continued lifting across the room. Within seconds, the numbers climbed beyond anything I'd imagined. $750,000. $900,000. $1 million. The audience applauded. I turned toward Lily. She looked completely bewildered. They really do. The bidding continued. $1,500,000. $2 million. Gasps spread across the gallery. Collectors weren't hesitating anymore. They competed with calm determination. $2,800,000. $3 million. Someone near the back raised another paddle. $3.6 million. A telephone bidder entered. The room grew electric. $4 million. No one spoke. Then one final bid came from the front row. $4,600,000. The auctioneer looked across the audience. Any advance on $4,600,000? Silence. He lifted the gavel. Sold. The room exploded into applause. Lily covered her mouth. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders. For one beautiful moment, nothing else existed. Then my mother stood. She didn't clap. Instead, she marched directly toward the auction officials. My attorney needs to speak with you immediately, she announced loudly. The proceeds from that sculpture belong to me. Several conversations stopped. Reporters hurried closer. Guests exchanged uneasy glances. My mother's attorney opened his briefcase. We formally assert our client's ownership before funds are distributed. The auctioneer slowly lowered his paperwork. No one moved. No one seemed certain what would happen next. He glanced toward the front row. Ladies and gentlemen. He hesitated. Before ownership is discussed, the winning bidder has requested permission to address the room. The gallery fell completely silent. Then a man in the front row stood and said, "Before anyone discusses ownership, there's something everyone deserves to know." The man walked calmly toward the stage. He wasn't dramatic. He didn't raise his voice. Yet every conversation in the gallery faded until the room was completely silent. Rebecca stepped aside and handed him the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "I'd like to introduce Dr. Jonathan Mercer, Director of the International Museum of Contemporary Expression." A quiet murmur moved through the audience. My mother looked relieved. She actually smiled. I could almost see what she was thinking. Someone important was finally here. Surely he would recognize her claim. Instead, he turned toward Lily. "Miss Bennett," he said warmly, "it's an honor to meet you." Lily gave a small nod. "Thank you." He smiled before facing the audience. My museum submitted the winning bid of $4,600,000. Applause broke out again. He waited until it settled. "We did not purchase this sculpture because it is technically perfect." He looked toward the small clay figure displayed beneath protective glass. "We purchased it because it documents the exact moment an extraordinary artistic voice first became visible." Every camera in the room turned toward him. Our research team spent nearly 18 months tracing the history of this sculpture. My mother's smile disappeared. We examined photographs, conservation records, museum documentation, witness statements, and the physical condition of the piece itself. He paused. There is no uncertainty regarding its history. My mother's attorney shifted uncomfortably. Dr. Mercer continued. "When Lily Bennett created this sculpture at 6 years old, she presented it as a birthday gift." My mother straightened. "Exactly." He calmly raised one hand. Please allow me to finish." The room became silent again. That same evening, the recipient publicly rejected the sculpture and discarded it into a donation box. Nobody moved. Before the donation was collected, Charlotte Bennett recovered the sculpture and preserved it continuously for the next 9 years. He looked directly at me. Without that single decision, this sculpture would almost certainly have been destroyed. A reporter immediately raised a hand. "So the museum considers Mrs. Charlotte Bennett the documented owner?" "Yes." Another reporter asked, "Does the original recipient retain any ownership interest?" Dr. Mercer answered without hesitation, "No." He turned toward the audience. Ownership was abandoned when the sculpture was intentionally discarded. My mother's attorney quietly closed his briefcase. She stared at him. "Aren't you going to say something?" He leaned toward her and spoke softly enough that only those closest could hear. "There isn't a case." My mother's face lost all color. She looked at me for the first time that evening. "Charlotte." I didn't interrupt. I simply waited. I didn't think. "No," I answered quietly. "You didn't." For several long seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Lily slowly walked onto the stage. Every camera followed her. She looked at the sculpture, then at the audience. Speaking in front of strangers had always been difficult for her. I could see her gathering courage. Finally, she said, "When I was 6, she stopped." The room waited patiently. I thought Grandma didn't love my gift. Not a single person made a sound. Lily took another breath. "My mom kept it." She looked at me. "My mom kept me making art." Tears filled my eyes. The applause began quietly. Then it spread through the entire gallery. People weren't applauding the auction. They weren't applauding the price. They were applauding a mother who had protected one small piece of her daughter's heart when no one else had. Several relatives who had supported my mother slowly approached me. My cousin Rachel spoke first. "I'm sorry." "So am I," another aunt admitted. "We believed the wrong person." I nodded. "I know." None of us could change what had happened 9 years earlier. But at least no one was pretending it hadn't happened. The auction proceeds were transferred exactly as planned. Every dollar funded scholarships for autistic and other neurodivergent children pursuing visual arts. The program was named the First Voice Initiative, honoring the idea that every artist deserves someone who believes in their earliest work. News coverage focused almost entirely on Lily's journey. Headlines celebrated the little sculpture that had nearly disappeared forever. Reporters also told another story. Not about its value. About the mother who quietly rescued it from a donation box because she refused to let her daughter believe her first act of love was worthless. As for my mother, she withdrew from the public eye. The relatives who once admired her became distant after learning the truth. The respect she'd spent decades trying to cultivate disappeared far faster than she'd imagined. Months later, she sent me a handwritten letter. Not asking for money. Not arguing about ownership. Simply apologizing. I read it. Then I placed it in a drawer. Some apologies deserve acknowledgement. Not immediate restoration. Trust returns only when actions change, not when words finally catch up. 2 years later, Lily and I stood inside Dr. Mercer's museum. Children filled the gallery. Teachers guided school groups from one sculpture to the next. Near the entrance, protected behind crystal-clear glass, stood the little clay sculpture that had once rested inside a cardboard donation box. Beside it was a bronze plaque. It read, "The earliest surviving work of Lily Bennett, preserved by her mother, Charlotte Bennett, whose decision ensured that an artist's first voice would never be lost." A little girl no older than Lily had been stared at the sculpture for nearly a minute. Then she tugged her father's sleeve. I want to make something too. Her father smiled. I'd love to see it. Lily looked at me. I smiled back. 9 years earlier, I had rescued a piece of clay because I couldn't bear to throw away my daughter's love. I never imagined I was preserving the beginning of her legacy. Sometimes the most valuable thing we protect isn't the object itself. It's the person who created it.